Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third webinar in the Wimmera Productive Soils Series, supported by the Wimmera Catchment Management Authority through funding from the Australian Government's National Landcare program. My name is Prue Cook. I'm the Director of Nine Creeks Consulting, and I'm your webinar host across the series. This webinar series explores farm practices and innovations that Wimmera farmers can use to manage their soils and improve profitability. The webinars will examine existing and emerging approaches, focusing on local relevance and delivering current research, essential considerations and guidance on implementation. Let's get straight into today's topic by introducing today's presenter, Dr. Kate Burke from Think Agri. Kate is a highly experienced independent farm consultant with a PhD in agronomy. Kate spent time in the corporate sector as a commercial manager of one of the largest grain producers in Australia, and she knows what it takes to run a profitable farm business. This background enables Think Agri to offer the very best strategic advice and guidance to investors and family farm businesses alike. Over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Prue, and welcome everybody to this session. The art of excellent seasonal decision making is what I've called it. And Prue, if you could just pop to the next slide. Essentially what we'll talk today is about how to get the best out of your farm productive capacity each season using some decision-making support tools, particularly soil moisture probes and ways of thinking about the forecast going forward. So go to the next one, please. This is how I think about farming. Your farming goals rely on the ability to capture rainfall, convert that plant available water into some produce, and then collect that produce and ultimately exchange it for cash. So I like this model because it simplifies everything down to just thinking about ultimately what we're trying to do and gets us away from the nitty-gritty detail. And sometimes we need to do that just to get some clarity. So if we just go to the next one, please, Prue. When it comes to deciding what to do throughout the season, there's a really good process that I like to use called yield scenario analysis. And I guess it's just like a game plan. It's like a process that you put in place if you're going out into play a game of football or playing golf. You know, you have a setup and you have a process. So essentially, this process involves getting a baseline from your previous years and being able to estimate and measure the current plant available soil water. Then once we've done that, we're able to make an estimate of the water limited yield potential and think about several possible futures. Obviously, you need to be common sense checking your crop all the time. And then the third bit of this is about looking into the likelihood of different scenarios developing, and then what do we do with that decision? So that's the process we're going to work through today. This is a how rather than a what or a why presentation. So we're going to assume that you understand why you need to do this stuff, and I'm just telling you how to do it. Next one, thanks, Prue. Okay, so once you've done this whole process, you can end up with something like this. So you end up with, the current soil moisture status and the yield that you may get from that particular level of moisture. And then we look forward. So what happens from our winter and spring rainfall? And we can get three different scenarios. And then what do we do with that information based on those yield potentials? Keep going, please, Prue. The trick to doing this, though, is to keep repeating the process. It's not much point just doing it once and then sticking to that number, because the season will keep changing. So this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, it's those three steps I talked about before. How much soil moisture have you got? What's the yield potential? What's the likelihood of the different scenarios? And what are the decisions you're going to make from it? Keep going, please, Prue. Okay, so let's start at step one, where we're at now. The soil moisture monitoring tools that are available to you. This is the AgVic newsletter and link, and there's obviously soil moisture monitors, a network now all around Victoria, and you may well have some yourself. So you can just see from here that throughout the various parts of Victoria, we've got a reasonable amount of moisture at the beginning of this season. Keep going. Thanks, Prue. So this is a snapshot of the soil moisture monitoring sites, and note that the two red sites, one down at Moyston and one in the West Wimmera, are basically perennial pastures. But this was actually, I think, 1st of June, so there's been more rain since then, so some of these sites would have changed. So blue is very wet, green is okay, and yellow is moderate. Go to the next one, thanks, Prue. And go to the next one. Next one, we'll get through all those ones. So I borrowed those slides from Dale Boyd from the Department of Agriculture. And this is another piece of information that just gives you a snapshot over the whole state. And this is displayed, this comes from the Fast Break, one of the Department of Ag products, and it's basically Met Bureau data. But again, it also shows that there's a reasonable amount of moisture at most places. Go to the next one. This is another tool that I use, and basically this is on an app on the phone, Climate, and one of the things I do to estimate soil moisture as a quick and dirty way is to just track the amount of rainfall from November until the current point. And you can see there across the Wimmera, you know, that some areas are tracking well above average and some are right on average from November to now. So that gives you a fairly good feel for how much moisture is around. Go to the next one, thanks, Prue. Now I just want to use a particular example. So this is at Turrumbry, which is 24 kilometres west of Echuca. And this paddock is actually our little pride and joy. So our first foray into owning a paddock ourselves. It's a single paddock, 116 hectares, and you can see at the top there, if you've got good eyes, that oh, you won't be able to see that, my pointer, but if you look at the top left picture and see the dam down at the bottom there and move across to the top, you can sort of, there is a water course throughout there. Throughout the paddock, and you can also see that in the EM map below. So it's a variable paddock, and it's got a bit of salt underneath it, as you can see by the chloride in those soil tests that we did earlier in the year. Just go to the next one, Prue. Oh, that's just us harvesting canola last year. The pride and joy managed to deliver a good canola paddock. So what do I do in using this process? I jump on the Climate app, I just go, how's the season progressing? And you can see there that the season is progressing quite well, and particularly since the autumn break, and we're well above average now. There's also another modelling tool called the Soil Moisture app, and Dale Boyd has kindly done an estimation for me based on that app, and he estimated around 78% full profile. He's actually adjusted that to slightly a little bit less than that, and essentially there's water, it's at field capacity down to 60 centimetres, and in our paddock, because of the salt, that's probably the full profile anyway. So we're pretty comfortable with where we're at now. Go to the next one. What I've done here, so this is actually fresh off the press. This is today. You'll see there's the paddock as it looks. So sort of got 1 to 2 leaf wheat. The season since April, where you can see there we're well above average. And the next bit I wanted to do was think, well, how likely is it that we might get, we've already had 150 mil for the growing season, and that's extraordinary for us. So what are the odds of getting, say, another 130? And again, I used Climate to try and look at those odds, and it's about a quarter of the years. 1 in 4 years you might get between July and the end of September 120 mils of rain. And then on the right you'll see those blue years, the years when that number was exceeded. And this is the interesting thing, those blue years are actually the last two, 2010 and 2016, are either IOD negative years or IOD negative and La Nina years. So that's the exciting thing. So let's go to the next slide. What's the Bureau telling us? Again, this is a little bit a week or so out of date, but the messages haven't changed much. They're effectively suggesting that, all the models are suggesting that negative IOD is highly likely in late winter and spring, and La Nina will be on the cusp. You may have just heard that we've dropped out of La Nina phase, and we're probably on the cusp potentially of having one or not later in the year. So we'll go to the next one. So what's the significance of these, what I call climate moods? So look, is it La Nina or neutral, or is it IOD negative or positive? History tells us that when IOD is negative, we have a tendency to have wet, cool years, as opposed to the opposite. IOD positive is when it's very dry or hot. It's a very blunt instrument, but it's a good start of understanding what might happen. When it comes to the Southern Oscillation Index and El Nino or La Nina, El Nino years, what I call climate years E and F for obvious reasons, aren't particularly attractive. They're dry and they're hot. Whereas La Nina years, excuse me, I may or may not sneeze in the next 2 minutes. Excuse me. La Nina years have a tendency to be variable but cooler. So they can be variable in rainfall and cooler. When you get a La Nina and an IOD negative, though, the IOD negative tends to ride shotgun over the La Nina, and you still tend to get wetter years. So that's pretty exciting, I reckon. So if we just go to the next one. This is an example of the rainfall anomaly at Echuca, not far from my place. And so the blue years are either La Nina and IOD negative. The light blue is just La Nina on its own. And you can see there that the likelihood of exceeding average is higher when you have an IOD negative, and the opposite for the El Nino and IOD positive situations. Next one. I've actually, being a bit of a nerd, I've simulated yields, and in those occasions where we have had IOD negative, in most times the yield has been, you know, a lot higher than the average. Our average is actually 2.5 tonne to the hectare. So go to the next one. These are some actual figures. Last year, canola 1.8 tonne to the hectare and a pretty reasonable price. And the year before that, vetch hay, and you can see there, and the year before that, oh, actually a few years prior to that, you can see it was barley, but again favourable. So go to the next one. So just a little bit closer to home, what do we do with this information? Again, where we're at the moment, we've got average to above average soil moisture. We've got a forecast of IOD negative and or La Nina. At Longeron, the the water limited yield potential for those years is quite substantial and quite higher than what we would normally target when we're doing things like nitrogen or grain yield. So depending on your risk levels, you'll make a decision as to what yields you target. But I guess the thing to be aware of is that in these forecasts, these are the years that you know, there's potentially a lot of grain out there on the table. Let's go to the next one. So back to our process, I suppose. We've established, in our case, on my paddock, we've established that we've got a reasonable amount of moisture now. We're only in the early stages of converting that moisture. The potential is quite promising, but we won't get too silly and load that crop up for 4 or 5 or 6 tonne just yet. We'll make sure it's got enough nitrogen for slightly above average. In our case, you know, that would be 3 tonne or above. And then as the season progresses, we'll keep doing this analysis and playing the odds. And then I guess as you get closer to the other end of the season, you start thinking about, well, what does a wet season mean? Do I need to procure plenty of fungicide? Do I need, you know, have I got everything in place to get through a wet season if it eventuates? Next one. This is a tool that's really useful. Now, Prue, are you going to have a live demo of this? If you click on that link. So this is a really good website to bookmark, and it's an excellent tool. And Prue, if you could just click on the any of those buttons there and see if we can get the whole screen up. Yeah, perfect. So I'll get you to click on, there we go. So click on all years. Basically, we've got a third chance in most locations when we put all years in having rainfall above or below or around average. Let's look what happens if we go to iodine negative, Prue. So the odds of having a wet August to the end of October strengthen strongly, that's an interesting phrase, when we're at iodine negative. Now, Prue, if you could just change the start month to July and the end month to September. And it's important to note that there is still a fraction of red in there. So it doesn't mean that it's absolutely guaranteed at each of those locations that history has told us that iodine negative means above average rainfall, but the odds are a lot higher of having a wet year than a dry year. And I think that's the thing to remember and give yourself a bit of confidence. But obviously you need to be monitoring what's on your patch, what your moisture level is and how you're tracking relative to average at home. So just go to La Nina. You can see there, La Nina is very different. You don't always have a wet winter and early spring, particularly in the Wimmera and in the Mallee. Now I'll just flick back to iodine negative again. And you can see the difference that makes there. Prue, I reckon that I'm going to leave it there because I guess what I've tried to do is just demonstrate some tools about understanding your own level of soil moisture, using some quick apps that you can look at to see where you're at to help with the decision making, and then it's really up to you and your risk appetite.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for your time today, Kate, and thank you to our audience for joining in. If you want to see any other of the recordings in our series, please go to the Wimmera CMA's YouTube channel. Thanks again for participating in today's webinar, supported by the Wimmera Catchment Management Authority through funding from the Australian Government's National Landcare program. I hope you have a wonderful day.